thank you so much for that presentation. I know there was one question which you kind of started to answer a little bit, and that was in relation to kind of how some of these passes are currently working or might work for a tool library. The library is doing some vetting, right? But maybe not as much vetting as a tool library might do for membership, and kind of how does that responsibility for the items go? Do public libraries take on that responsibility for whether an item is returned or not? Or so yeah, can you just talk a little bit about the minutia around the passes?
Yeah, so we do no vetting. I just want to be clear because remember, we have to be free and open to all. Okay? Ding, ding, ding. So this is where it gets really tricky. Everyone needs to have access to that museum pass or that library pass. So that's where you would have to put in your vetting. Like, okay, maybe it's only over 18 that you allow, right? So you would have to put those restrictions on. Denver is the only one I know of who's had it going for a while, so that you can check in with them on their more detailed system of exactly how that's working. So I can't answer to like the officials of their contract, but typically with a pass like system, you work it out between the library and you. Or maybe you sign up if you folks have memberships. Like, for example, we have library passes that we give out, like you get membership to our library for 3 months and 1 month. So you can, and they get access to everything unless we put in there no interlibrary loan for under a month, which makes sense, right? Because it actually takes you 3 weeks to get that book from across the world. So, but that is also, I mean, that's still pretty, can still be a really big deal for some libraries. So you may get pushback on that as well.
One thing that came up in an earlier session in relation to, let's say, professionals accessing the tool library, right? So someone that's a for-profit company getting materials from there and that having potentially a heavier wear and tear. There was a question about whether or not there could be or should be different membership tiers. Do you think it might work out for a public library to be like an institutional member? So it's not like, all right, there's an annual membership of $50 to access the Asheville Tool Library at a base level. That's the cost for the library membership pass, or is there a place there for a different relationship?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be worked out here. You're going to be trailblazers if you do the pass system. That's why I mentioned it. Yeah. My tool library hat is like, yes, there are ways in which you could have more institutional members, but from a liability perspective, the public library is not going to want to take on any liability for individual people getting your tools. They'll be willing probably to do replacement costs to a certain extent and pay that member, so pay a higher membership fee. But I think folks are more worried about what if they cut off their hand, because they're not trained. I think that's the benefit though there is that you have, okay, well, they can't use this tool until they're trained, right? And that's the benefit of a pass system. So I think there's a lot of potential for what you said to charge a public library a higher amount, but to make sure you explain why.
Quick question, I guess. Who do you first reach out to if you're looking to do a partnership with your library? Is there like a staff title, or do you go straight to the top, or how do you recommend just like a cold call or email?
Definitely cold call. We get them all day long. And go to the help desk. It might be called the reference desk, but yeah, absolutely cold call. And I would say ask for 3 people. Specifically ask for someone, but then say, okay, I'd also love to know. So, because for many libraries, you'll have something called the library director. But in some of those places, the library director may be like, oh, that's one more thing. I can't. Right? So you need to find your champion, and that may not be your director. So it may be the person who runs your programs, which could be very different, or it may be the person who puts on events, who could be very different. And it may be children's programming versus adult programming. I tell you, because in this world, there are, depending upon your library, they're really siloed. And library people on here, Rachel, feel free to say, no, it's not like that. So, but I know it is at some libraries, and you need your champion, not necessarily the person in charge.
I can attest to the tool library that runs at my public library. So I've been called out. I am Rachel. I live and work in Little Rock, Arkansas. I've been watching, and I'll say from my own experience here with the tool collection at the public library, it's quite different. Hazel's right. We will check it out to anyone without the training and that liability. For us here, we just use a tool library waiver and agreement form to kind of cover ourselves. At my tool library here at the public library, we only check out tools to adults who can consent. So we had the library lawyers check over an addendum and waiver form that goes onto their library record. We use a library cataloging system to keep track of all of our tools. So our poor catalogers in the book department had to learn how to suss apart what a tool is. The software we use is quite usable for three-dimensional objects. Our tool library was started from within the library. So there is no tool library in Central Arkansas where I live. There's no tool shares independent from the library. It's actually a growing collection within public libraries. So I wouldn't be surprised if your community library was interested in starting a library of things. Hazel and I can both attest that like at library conferences for the ALA and PLA, library of things is like a niche market that library staff have lots of questions and they're interested in developing this kind of resource for the communities just to make them as accessible and free as possible. But our tool library was started from a bond. So one of the managers here before I started knew that they were going to go under a major remodel for their branch and tried to throw in the tool library collection to that bond. And so it was put to voters in 2015 and they approved it because people love libraries, or at least in 2015 they did. And my job title came with that collection. So they actually advertised for a tool library position, but it also came with like library work. Yeah, there are public libraries out there interested.
Hers is so awesome, folks. You should check it out. It's so different than ours. And that's why I twisted her arm. Thank you, Rachel. I didn't warn her I was going to do that. We're going to try to do a webinar for the Public Library Association together. Also, I'm trying to find this woman who lends amazing chicken incubators from her rural library and is changing the food security system. Anyway, there are great humans out there who want to help you and love what you're doing, and they're in the public library world. But sometimes it can be a little tricky to find that common, like, okay, how are we going to do this? But there are models and there are people doing it, so it absolutely can be done. And if you need help, just please reach out to any of us.